few months ago, I spoke to Sabrina Schmitz about the Manage Agile, and she raved about a keynote speaker named Laura Storm and her innovative topic of regenerative leadership. Laura is a very known internationally speaker, and we are very happy to welcome her here, to let her here to share your heart project with us. Laura is an author, advisor, and expert on sustainability and regenerative leadership. For her work, she has been awarded the title World Changer by Greenpeace, is selected by the World Economic Forum as a young global leader, and named on the world's leading woman in sustainability and regenerative by Sustainability Brands. So a warm welcome to Laura Storm. We are very happy to be here. Your stage.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here. Can I have the clicker?
Yes, you can.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, and I hope that in the next hour I will have succeeded in maybe offering a different kind of lens or perspective to the importance of strengthening our capacity to manage in an agile way. But before I take you through a little journey, I would like all of us to kind of get up, because I would like to take you on a little journey. And if you are okay with that, I would like to invite you to close your eyes and put your left hand on your tummy, on your stomach area, and your right hand on your heart. So the journey that we will go on now is we will all be the designers of a space where we can always go in our minds when we feel the need to regenerate, access our potent life force, regain strength. So we will start by, in our minds, you don't do it in real life, but visualize in your head that you are now taking off your shoes and you are designing the kind of surface that you would now like to go on a little stroll. What kind of surface do your feet need to feel utterly happy? What makes you put a smile on your face when you walk on that surface? So visualize that you're now going on a stroll on that surface, a happy stroll towards your happy place. And start to invite in the kind of surroundings that you need to feel happy. And you go on a walk, and you notice how you feel pulled towards a certain special place that is like a place from your dreams. And it has something that is really inviting you to sit down, and you can lean your back up against it. And you start to look around. And what kind of surroundings do you need to feel really happy, to feel calm, peaceful, and grounded? What kind of lighting do you need? Invite all of that in. What kind of sounds do you need to feel happy? And when you reach the surface and the ground that you're sitting on, how does that feel like? And what is it that you're leaning your back against? And how does that feel like when you touch it? So invite in all of those delicious things that you need to feel utterly peaceful. This is where you can always go in your minds. When you need to escape the craziness of our current world, you can go here and feel peaceful and calm. This is like pulling yourself into a plug to recharge. So you now get up and you can stretch your arms, and you can do that in real life as well. And you get up and you walk back barefooted on that delicious surface you've designed. And you walk back and you come back to this room with all your new friends. That felt good. I would like to know by show of hands how many designed a space that had elements from nature. I think 99%, maybe 99.7%. Thank you so much. You can now sit down. And we will come back to why that is important, because this is not a coincidence that you did that and that you felt drawn to that. So what I will talk about today is why we need regeneration. I've written a book called Regenerative Leadership that will actually be translated to German quite soon. It's in the process. So if any of this is intriguing to you, there's good news for you. But it is in English for those of you that are okay with that. So why do we need regeneration right now? Why do we need regenerative leadership? And why are more and more organizations starting to get their heads around this? So for the past 2 to 3 years, the amount of companies that are suddenly getting on the train of regenerative business and leadership is quite overwhelming. Those of us that have talked about this for a very long time have been kind of used to having to sometimes yell very loudly to get the attention, and that's not needed in any way today. There's really an eagerness about, both among startups, among middle-sized company, but also big multinationals. They want to get on the regenerative business and leadership bandwagon. And that's quite interesting. And why is that? So let's zoom out and take a look at the 21st century leadership landscape that we are all navigating, and where manage, agile, and the whole agility scene is one component, but only one component. So it is a bit of an overwhelming scene that leaders of today are navigating within. And it can be overwhelming for many. And many leaders don't feel equipped to navigate the seriousness of the interconnectedness of these kinds of challenges. So just to take you through a few of them. So for the past 3 decades, we have lost 75% of our flying insect population. And just for the record, we cannot live without flying insects. If the bee collapse become a reality, we only have 4 years to live. We have cut 80% of natural forest. We cannot live without forests. They are the lungs of this fascinating ecosystem we call planet Earth. We have, through monocultural farming, we have depleted soil to the extent that that soil is now eroding, and it's also lacking the critical minerals that our bodies, our ecosystems need to actually function properly. Many scientists believe that due to that way of farming land, we only have 60 harvests left. That's quite serious. And by 2050, we will have more plastic in our oceans than marine life. So these are just some of the stats, and this is not a lecture into the seriousness of that. It's today and for the next hour, it's more, how can we find the cracks of light, and how can we find excitement around this new emerging paradigm? So yes, climates are breaking down, and we have crossed 6 out of 9 planetary boundaries that we cannot cross if you want to avoid planetary collapse. When I talked last year in October, we had only crossed 4 boundaries. So it's scaling up at quite a dire beat. It's quite scary, to be honest. We have since the 1950s been through the great acceleration. So everything from CO2 consumption to urban population to population in general to GDP to tourism to transportation, everything has been on the same steep increase. And I have been working in the field of sustainability my entire life. I started my kind of little mission as an 8-year-old doing campaigns to raise funds to buy up pieces of the Amazon. And for the past 20 years, I've worked in the field of sustainability. And I believe that the whole agility piece fits into the sustainability piece. And I hope you will all be clearer once I'm done talking and once we are done having a conversation together. The challenge that I have seen again and again in fields of sustainability is the fact that we talk about these issues a lot. We talk a lot about scaling technologies and we talk a lot about all of these challenges, but we never talk about the fact that depression, stress, burnout, suicide rates, same exact steep increase. And to me, those things are interconnected. It's not separate challenges or problems. And for us as leaders to address this, we need to address them in an interconnected, holistic way. We need to understand how we can become regenerators that are regenerating both the inner and outer ecosystems. The challenge is that when we are stressed and burned out, we cannot physically access empathy or compassion. Our brains go into what is called high beta. It's a genius evolutionary brainwave state that we can enter, that when we were hunter-gatherers, when we met a predator, we would go into high beta. So all our energy would rush to our brains to solve that immediate challenge. We would get tunnel vision and we would filter everything else out. It's genius, but the challenge is 98% of executives in the US, and we don't have the numbers for Europe, but I think it's quite similar. 98% of executives spend the majority of their time, 90% of their time going through their business day in high beta. And I think that says quite a lot about the landscape we have and the toxicity we have in many organizations today. Because we are a species that is actually quite young if you look at the greater scheme of things. Life has been around for 3.8 billion years, and we have only been here for 200,000 years. So for 500,000 generations of evolutions of the Homo sapiens, our brains and our nervous systems were developed in nature. And we have been developed to be constantly in tune with our surroundings and our environment, constantly sensing and responding because that meant our survival or our death. And our bodies are not geared to navigate the overwhelming noise of our world of today. And it's a massive leadership challenge. I wanted to offer you some insights from Steve Porges, who has developed the polyvagal theory, which I think is incredibly important for leaders to be aware of. So basically, there are 3 states that our nervous systems can be in. We have the neuroception of safety. That is the lower level. That is where we feel safe and connected, and that is actually the only state where our bodies can go to where we can truly regenerate. And we can overcome illness, and we can overcome challenges, etc. That is where we feel happy and joy-filled and can really connect with other human beings from a heart-to-heart level. And then there's the neuroception of danger. That is when we start to feel a little overwhelmed. And Steve is talking about 4 main categories when we go into the neuroception of danger, which is find, fawn, flee, and fight. And you have all experienced, I would assume, various levels of those. So find is when we go into this pattern of being really eager to get kind of appraisal from the outside. That is when our ego gets the driver's seat. That is when we really want people to like our post on LinkedIn. That is when we become addicted to getting appraisal from the outside. And then we have the fawn state. that is where we will do everything to please others. That is where our inner pleaser takes the driving wheel. And we just really want other people to like us, so we will go do everything it takes for them to like us. It will also mean we will abandon ourselves. And then we have the flee mode, which is when we start to be kind of anxious and we avoid others, and we can easily go into an anxiety attack. And then we have the fight state. That is when we become very annoyed with other people very easily. And if you have kids, that happens quite often, maybe. But it's that state where it's just like, can you please shut up? And maybe it's not something we say out loud. It can also be an inner dialogue in a meeting where we're just like, oh, that person is just so freaking annoying. And I think we've all experienced various levels of that. And then we have the final level, which is sort of like, that is when we burn out and completely cannot do anything. So visually, those 3 states look like this. And I think it's interesting to just kind of contemplate, both for ourselves, what kind of state is our nervous system in when we go through our day. And when we look around in the world, where do we think most leaders operate from on a daily basis? It's interesting just to have that as a little perspective when we go about our day. And it's interesting to start to create a relationship to our own inner being and start to catch ourselves when we go into the 4 Fs. That is kind of our warning signals that we need to bring ourselves back to center. So the challenge with our state of our inner ecosystem is that right now, leaders are actually too overwhelmed to navigate through this complexity landscape. They point towards innovation and creativity and thinking outside the box being some of the most important skills to look for in employees, to look for in leaders. But the challenge is that 75% of most executives, but also a lot of employees, they feel too overwhelmed and burned out to access their creativity and innovation. And it's a problem that we don't really talk about, also in the Agile leadership landscape, which can have a slightly mechanistic approach. We need to factor in everything. Because right now, what we as a collective, with what all of us are facing as a collective, is an interconnected negative feedback loop that has stress in both inner and outer planetary systems. And the challenge is that even though we know that, we keep doing what we already feel comfortable doing. That's one of the most kind of normal traits among many executives, but also many human beings. It's too overwhelming, so we just stick with what we know. And this is just an analysis that is where 50% were honest enough to express that they weren't equipped to lead in these challenging times. But I think the number is way higher because it takes a lot of courage to admit to yourself that you don't have what it takes to navigate a time like this. Because we've never had a time like the current times. And the challenge is, as I said, that we stick with what we know. So for example, when we talk about transitioning to sustainability, we talk about scaling technologies, we talk about new political frameworks, we talk about financial mechanisms. We talk about some of the kind of tools we have in our toolbox, that this is how we solve challenges. And then we meet at gatherings like this to talk about scaling technologies and all of that. But we can't see the forest for the trees right now. And we are doing, you've all heard this quote many times. And sometimes I'm just like, I'm so fed up with executives using, you can't solve the challenges with the same logic that they created it in the first place, because we have talked about this for such a long time, yet we continue to do exactly that. I think many of us don't have the courage to radically reinvent how we approach problem solving. And I agree, my German is very, very poor. But I did get kind of the gist that a part of us accessing new ways of thinking is also to allow playfulness and fun. And therefore, I warmly welcome and celebrate that you have a track dedicated to that. Because we need to think outside the box. We need to play together. And we need to bring the heart, the compassion, the play, the creativity back into the centerpiece of how we approach challenges of today. We need to dare open that window and start to see the interconnectedness of life. instead of staying within the box and persuading each other that it's the same linear mechanistic thinking that is needed to get us out of this mess, because it's not. So it can be interesting just to kind of reflect for a little while on what actually has shaped management thinking in literature. I studied business as well, and what we were taught was very much still that kind of mechanistic approach to doing business that is shaped by some of these companies that you see up here. So these were the top 10 on the Fortune 500 list back in 1970. And they have all really kind of created the characteristics of the Industrial Revolution, where the whole raison d'etre is that you extract natural resources and you optimize human resources, and you run the organization as if it was a machine. And this is organizational design at its best. But the challenge is that this kind of organizational design, and you all know this because I think that's very much the reason why we need radical new thinking, and we need more self-organization, and we need more agile teams, etc. So for this is not new. But this organizational design, this is where so much potent life force energy gets trapped into pockets that never gets the chance to be expressed because it's suppressed within the hierarchy. And these were the kind of management tools that I was also taught 15 years ago. And those are not gonna cut it. And that's also the reason why you are here today and have dedicated the rest of the week to kind of explore what is the new way to reinvent how we do organizational design. 30 years later, it was still roughly the same kind of companies. That's 22 years ago now. And the interesting thing is that now things are changing at a speed we haven't really taken in yet. 52% of the people or the companies on the Fortune 500 list back in year 2000 have now gone extinct. They didn't see the writing on the wall in due time. And the sad thing is that most Fortune 5 companies to this day are still based on the 20th century extractive model. But the good thing is that, as I started with, we see a radical new change in leadership and a craving for something radically different. And it's a collective longing that I see in the C-suite, but also among many employees. And what are some of these trends? You've probably heard about quiet quitting. It's a global trend right now, and it's not people actually leaving, it's people staying within the organization, but they have given up. They're disengaged, they're just there to get the paycheck, and then they find what makes them happy elsewhere. And that's a massive drain to any organization if you just have people there as ghosts that are not offering their true potent life force energy. The great resignation started about a year ago, or people actually quitting in numbers we've also never seen before, because they're tired of being micromanaged. They want a greater sense of purpose. They crave meaning. They have this collective longing for a deeper sense of purpose, of psychological safety, of feeling appreciated as a human being. So organizations, they need engaged employees. We see it again and again in study over study that if you have highly engaged people, you have higher productivity, better retention, fewer mistakes, higher profitability, better reported health and well-being. It's such an important focus area. Another trend that this is kind of radically different times is that right now 64% of millennials, and it's actually even bigger number among Gen Zs, they only want to work for companies that have a hardcore sustainability purpose or mission. They want to invest their time and energy into the kind of world that they are proud of being co-creators of. And then there's also an interesting trend that was revealed earlier this year in spring, that right now, for the first time, we're starting to see a massive change in consumer patterns. That right now, consumers' preference to shop sustainable brands have increased by nearly 25%. That is also new. People want to invest more in sustainable products, and they are willing to pay more for that. So it's an interesting time, and this is kind of the transition that I think we are going towards. and that we need to go towards if we want to stick around as a species on this planet. And this is not me being overly unnecessarily dramatic. This is the truth, guys. If we want to stick around, we need to move in that direction, and we need to start aligning our ways with the laws of life instead of laws of destruction and extraction. So the good thing is that a lot of companies are starting to get on the train of sustainability. The challenge is that it's not going to cut it, because we don't really want to sustain the world we have right now. We don't want to maintain and stay within status quo. We need to kind of leapfrog, and we need to advance radically our ways and how we design business and how we lead the world into a new era. So this is the direction we need to take. We need to go from hierarchies to self-organized living systems. And we need to start to working, as I said, with life. And as we started with today, the good thing is that a lot of companies are starting to get on this train right now. And as coaches and consultants, if there's anyone in the room right now, you need to start to train yourself to think in regenerative ways, because this is in increasing high demand. Understanding how can we transform to regeneration. So let's look at what the pioneers within the regenerative era is actually doing. They are lending from the wisdom of the only system on this planet that has stood the test of time, which is living systems. They are using living systems as their design guide, and they are tapping into this 3.8 billion years of evolutionary experience to redesign their organizations. And these pioneers understand that this whole idea of exponential growth on a finite planet goes against the law of physics. So we need to do things differently, and we need to tap in to 3.8 billion years of R&D. So how is it that they actually do that? My co-author Giles Hutchins and I have distilled the essence of this logic of life into these 7 principles. We don't have time to go through all of them in detail. But what they do is they inform the regenerative business DNA. They inform the regenerative leadership DNA that I will talk you through. So hopefully you can take that as a takeaway. So they are the foundation for the regenerative business DNA that consists of 3 main components. Living systems design. So how do we lend on this wisdom and how we design products and services? Living systems culture. How do we design thriving, vibrant organizations that are geared for the challenges of the 21st century? And then the third element, which is living systems being. What qualities do we need to nurture within for us to live up to our name, which is Homo sapiens, which means the wise beings? And right now, we are not living up to that name. So how can we honor that name? We can do that by starting to get our heads around this way of doing business and this way of leading. So let me give you a few examples of what living systems design covers. These are some of the DNA strands of living systems design that taps into biomimicry, biophilic design, circular economy, taps into the importance of ecosystemic thinking. A few examples of this is that the first principle of life is that life continuously creates conditions for more life to thrive. That's how life works. And we could actually stop there. That could be just one principle, and we could leave it at that. And what it covers is the fact that there is no waste in nature. Everything is part of a closed loop, where when the apple falls to the ground, as they do right now, it's not waste. It's potent, delicious nutrients for the topsoils and for millions of microbes to feed on, to help us build that important topsoil that we need to thrive as human beings on this planet, that we need to avoid our soil to get eroded and at the end of the day only having 60 harvests left. And inside that potent apple that had fell on the ground lies the seed and the batch for the next round of innovation and production. It's genius design that we can lend wisdom from, and thankfully the circular economy, that's their main design principle. But it's that whole notion of how can I start to train myself and go away from life-generating practices, leave that in the past, and move into life-affirming practices that when we talk about permaculture farmers and regenerative farmers, they work with the land. They make sure that the soil can contain water and CO2, whereas this way of farming lets out all the air, or all the CO2 and all the water. Which means that when a heavy rainfall falls on this kind of soil, we get erosion and we get we get massive kind of challenges with surplus of water because the soil cannot contain it. And it same goes for our organizations. We don't understand the fact that from a genetic point of view, we have more DNA in common with chimpanzees than horses has with donkeys. So we are more in family with chimpanzees than donkeys are with horses. And we think that we can put these kinds of chimpanzees into concrete buildings under artificial lighting and work on a machine like this for the majority of our day. And when we did the little meditation journey, you experience the fact that we have a natural pull towards nature. It's our natural habitat, but we are nature deprived. And I think a large part of the reason that so many of us are depressed and burnt out is because we are not allowing our ecosystem to get the exposure to the natural environment which we are a part of. So how can we create vibrant workplaces that is actually factoring that in? That is factoring the fact that science are now telling us what we have known for a long time, that when we spend just 20 minutes in nature, our moods have improved, our immune systems improve. We reduce the stress hormones like cortisol, and we increase our creative problem-solving skill by 50% just after 20 minutes in nature. We feel more connected to each other. We find it more joyful to collaborate. We improve our memory, and we become more compassionate. We need to get the hell out there, and we need to start working from there. At least we need more exposure to our natural habitat and spend less time in buildings like these. We need to start to reclaim the fact that we are these cyclical beings flying around on a cyclical planet. More and more companies are doing that and are tapping into living systems design. Interface, which some of you may have heard of, are soon ready with their factories that are completely inspired by the forest. So they have worked with biomimicry specialists, biologists, on how can we transform our factories to work and function like a forest, to turn sunlight into energy, to purify water, so the water that leaves interface factories are cleaner than when it came in. We use regenerative materials, and when employees go into the door, they feel they walk into a forest, because we know that the inner informs the outer. And then there's this little picture here of a Philippine fisherman, because Interface has this ecosystemic approach to how they do business. They have mapped all of their key ecosystem intervention and nodal points. So for example, they use plastic in their production. Interface is a carpet manufacturer, by the way. They need plastic for a certain part of their production. So they think, okay, how can our organization become a superorganism that helps clean up a major problem we have on this planet? So they pay Philippine fishermen a decent fee to fish up discarded plastic net from the ocean, and they use that in the production that they actually sell as a closed loop deal. So when a carpet tile is stained, you can get a new one and then use that for the next batch of production, etc. And that's the kind of thinking that we need more of. This is an architect that I admire greatly, Vincent Callebaut, and he designs buildings and environments and neighborhoods that are the neighborhoods that we need more of right now. He creates an environment where people can actually be who they truly are. We know that from a study in Chicago that in a neighborhood where crime rates were off the roof and police had to go there and be present there all the time. That when they started to grow little green areas and plant a lot of trees, crime rate reduced by 42% in the first 2 years in that area. We need to be surrounded by our natural habitat to feel alive. And this is one of his many projects, but his approach is that we need to create spaces where we can thrive and where the biodiversity that all life on this planet depends on can thrive as well. And we need quiet spaces, and we need to be self-sufficient, and we can do this. This is possible. This is within reach. And I just wanted to mention him because how does all this fit together with the whole agility space? It goes together because people can never be fully agile if they don't feel well. And if they're locked into buildings under artificial lighting and we expect them to be efficiently agile, that is something that is an approach that we need to challenge. So all of this goes together. Living systems culture is the part of the DNA framework that is focusing on how do we create thriving new ways of being an organization. And how do we lend wisdom again from life in the fact that life is ever-changing and responsive. Life depends on strong relationships. So we have all been told a lie about the survival of the fittest, and I hope you know that, but if you don't, I wanted to make sure you took that away at least from today. We all say as an excuse that we need kind of fierce competition because it's part of our nature, but that is a lie. Life only thrives and has come around for millennia of years due to very strong partnerships. What Darwin said was not the survival of the fittest, as in the strongest, the loudest, the most kind of ruthless alpha male that was the most dominating in meetings, for example. What he said was, it's not the strongest species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the ones most able to adapt to change. And you adapt to change when you have really strong relationships. Another biologist later on, she's no longer with us, but she's an amazing thinker, she was, Lynn Margulis, said life did not take over the globe by combat, but by networking. And the species that have been here the longest are those that have been best at creating really strong interconnected partnerships. So what can we learn from life there? Fritjof Capra, the physicist, communicates that in a visual, very simple way. That when any organism, and now he's using the body as an example, when we have strong relationship between all the components in the living system, then it's a thriving organism. And once the components start to collaborate very poorly, we start to get ill and eventually we will die. The degree to which a living system is thriving depends on the degree to which the living systems and the relationship within that system is thriving. So we need to see the whole instead of the parts, but we have been trained to see departments and silos and parts. And that's kind of like something we took away from the scientific revolution, where we started to, instead of seeing the whole, we started to zoom in on the parts. And we forgot a bit that wholeness piece. And that's something that we need to reclaim and relearn, because imagine if the KPIs of the heart undermine the KPIs of the lungs. But that is what we see again and again in organizations. KPIs competing against each other, teams, people competing against each other, instead of seeing themselves as part of a bigger whole, where we can create win-win-win scenarios, and where we can tap into abundance instead of scarcity. So we need this whole system perspective. Also in our problem solving, we can't just zoom in on one thing. We need to let go of that stress-infused tunnel vision and instead look at the whole when we assess an organizational status. And we can again learn from nature. So when a link in a food web goes extinct, it can mean the collapse of the entire ecosystem. And it's very important to start to, in your organization, detect who is your keystone species. So for example, an example from Yellowstone National Park. There was wolves there that were eating the deer. And humans thought that was not good, so we need to get rid of the wolves. So they got rid of the wolves. 20 years later, that ecosystem of the Yellowstone National Park was in a really dire, poor state. So biologists thought, we think it's actually important that you reintroduce the wolves to this precious ecosystem because it's a keystone species. So they did that, and within a few years, that ecosystem regained its health and vitality. And the reason is that we need reinforcing and balancing feedback loops to ensure dynamic equilibrium in any ecosystem, in any living system. So the deer population increased, that's just a reinforcing feedback loop. Increase, 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 unless they have the balancing feedback loop, which means the deer comes in and kills a few of the deer so they don't eat all the food, so all the other animals can't have enough food to access. So that's part of how life works. And we can translate that into our organization. What is the reinforcing feedback loops? And when do we need to make sure we have a balancing feedback loop? There are many examples. You could also say that the design of us having weekends is a balancing feedback loop. So instead of working all the time, we have the balancing feedback loop of a weekend. But we need more consciously to design that into human-designed living systems because it's not natural to us. So that's something we need to reflect upon. Living systems are constantly sensing and responding to change. And we can see that on a microscopical level, but the same goes for our organizations, and the same goes for individuals. And we need to develop and train our capacity to constantly sense and respond, and allow all cells in our organism to constantly sense and respond. And we need to understand what is the perfect dynamic equilibrium, what is homeostasis for our organization, and what do we need? So all cells, they are working constantly to make sure they can continue to keep homeostasis within that cell. And if they don't succeed, that cell die. And that's maybe a bit dramatic, but if we kind of translate that into organizations, if we are not able to keep a dynamic equilibrium, homeostasis within our organizations, we will die. So how can we train all of ourselves to sense and respond and give us the feedback that we need? And how can we lend wisdom from superorganisms like ants or flock of birds or bees? Bees and ants work in teams of three, and the leadership role always take turn. They're constantly sensing and responding. And they use feedback loops and they use pheromone signals to communicate. Most ants have 17 different communication signals, pheromone signals. That's not a lot. But they are impressively efficient. When an anthill gets flooded, they can save the queen and they can save the eggs. They can create a raft by tying together. They can float down a river. They can set up new camp, new anthill. All of that within the scope of 30 minutes. They are impressively efficient. And we are not ants and we are not bees, but there are still things that we can learn when we study superorganisms in detail, because Homo sapiens is a superorganism as well. And an organization is a whole system as well, with dynamic feedback loops and all the kinds of feedback flows that we can start to study. And it's really interesting to start to study it with the lens of nature. And one of the things a systems thinker has said when she studied living systems is that, and translated that into organizational development, is that what she sees again and again is that large organizations, they lose their resilience. They lose their carrying capacity to withstand systemic shocks. Those were my words, but back to her words. Simply because the feedback mechanisms by which they sense and respond to the environment have to travel through too many layers of delay and distortion. And that is what we see again and again. And that is where people like you fit in, because that is part of the essence of the Agile leadership discourse. How can we, to be more agile and to tap into creating better feedback flows within living systems as organizations? We need to start to train our lens for seeing the disrupted feedback loops. And the root of those are often, not always, but often mistrust, or again, going back to the polyvagal theory, too many are in either of the 4 F's. They are eagerly trying to fit in, not being in coherence with themselves, or they are in fight mode too often. So how can we start to spot the 4 Fs to create an organization that is not constantly sapped of its life force energy, where toxic communication or toxic power dynamics is at the driver's wheel? How can we start to spot that? Because it's disrupting negatively the flow and the potential of the organization. We need to also let go of the energy of the parent-child dynamic that we see in many organizations, because it's suppressing, it's dominating, and we need to set that free so we can actually have an adult to adult, regardless of whatever title we may have. So again, back to living systems. So living systems, they are constantly trying to seek coherence and that homeostasis. And in an organization, we can see again and again that when we have a dysfunctional culture, we are often operating in incoherence. And then it's really difficult for that organization to be in flow and to tap into that organization's full potential. It's actually impossible. And if it's not addressed, it will mean the end of that organization. And we can start to spot that kind of incoherent behavior, because incoherent behavior is creating degenerative ripple effects throughout the organization. So we need to start to trust when things don't feel right, when we sense that people are not authentic or in radical alignment with themselves, when they feel too nervous, ungrounded. How can we start to address that? And how can we see that as acupuncture point? And how can we start to realize the fact, this is a Nobel laureate, Ilya Prigogine, who said, small islands of coherence in a sea of chaos have the capacity to shift the entire system to a higher order. And that's something that I often tell people who are discouraged by working in a big machine and they can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. What I have seen again and again is once people start to do things differently and applying more regenerative ways, which can be as simple as facilitating a meeting differently that allows more of the human heart-spaced energy, it's present. It can be working with the seasons and cycles of life, which I will get back to. You probably all know Buurtzorg, because this is a crowd that understands or have read, I think, Reinventing Organizations. Is that a true assumption? Up with the hand if you know about the Buurtzorg case. Some of you don't. So very, very quickly. Buurtzorg was founded in 2005 by the amazing Josse Blok that I talked with a few weeks ago, because that's another story. Anyways, Buurtzorg is designed as a superorganism. So they started with 3 nurses who were fed up by the machine of the healthcare system. They wanted something that was heart-spaced and heart-centered. So they started Buurtzorg with the intention that we work as a superorganism. And power has to take turns. So right now they are over 15,000 employees. This is the 5th year they are awarded as the most popular place to work for in the Netherlands. They work in hives of 10 to 12 nurses. And within those 10 to 12 nurses, the roles have to take turns, so we don't allocate power with the nurses who's been there the longest. And the way they do decision making, which was what I talked to Joss about, was they have this app. So all the time people, those 15,000 ants out in the fields, can report back on any challenges or opportunities. And he sees the executive team, he sees them as a support system. So they are 25 people that sees themselves as supporters. And he says, my only role is to listen to the system and sense where I want to go next, where there's tension that I need to unleash or help unleash. It's quite an interesting case, and there are many depths to it. And they have, to a high extent, they have trained themselves to become coaches, because they, of course, when humans are together, there will inevitably be tension and clashes from time to time. But the interesting thing is that Buurtzorg are 60% more profitable than benchmark and have become 40% more cost efficient. due to their way of operating, but they have also spun out into 15 other sectors and companies because, hey, let's try and do our own IT company because we need something that is not yet on the market. Or, hey, let's do our own physiotherapy company because what we need is not on the market. Hey, let's do our own catering company because what we really want and what we think is high quality is not on the market. And that's an interesting approach to working as an organism that can spread as a mycelium. But it also takes someone with an executive like him that doesn't have an ego in overdrive. Life is also enhancing vitality and resilience through diversity. And thankfully, there's getting more and more awareness and recognition around the fact that we need a high degree of diversity to thrive as organizations, but also to be more efficient and productive. And even though we know it, it's not often what I see. It's not really the case. But in permaculture, we work with what is called the edge effect, where we deliberately design cultures to collide. We deliberately design meetings where people with different backgrounds are put together, and it can create tension. But the whole idea is that in that tension lies the golden nugget of wisdom and the potential that we need to unfold. And we can't allow any more organizations where we have this monocultural approach, where we hire people that reminds us of ourselves because that feels good and then we're not too challenged. It's just easier. We need to move beyond that, and we need to dare train our capacity to hold the tension of opposites. Because that is where the regenerative leader, the true alchemist, is really doing a genius job. And it's that capacity of not viewing it as either this or that, but it can be both and. And the regenerative leader works constantly with this energy of divergence and convergence, and know that that is the foundation for true emergence and true radical innovation. So divergence is that energy where we open up, experiment, we invite in consultants, we play, we get creative and a bit chaotic. And convergence is the energy where we consolidate and ground and kind of filter out the noise. And in a perfect dance between the two energies, that is where we see perfect emergence. But we need to be careful not to be either in too of the convergent energy or too much in the divergent energy. So we need to be these alchemists of transformation. And the final component is living systems being, which is all about these qualities that we need to nurture. And it's this awareness around the fact that, as I said before, we are cyclical beings on a cyclical planet. And we have designed work processes in a way where we think we can go from spring to summer, spring to summer, spring to summer, and never taking the time for integration or grounding and digesting, reflecting, integrating what we have learned. And when we do that, when we allow the energy of autumn and winter, that is where we can access our own true inner wisdom. That is where we integrate learnings, and that is where we can constantly evolve. So that is the level that we need to dare go to. For those of you interested, Vivo Barefoot is a company that I have worked with, and in their latest annual report, they showcase how they deliberately start to work that into their work processes. Vivo Barefoot, it's a barefoot brand. So everything in the inner constantly informs the outer. And that is something that we need to start to accept. And we need to accept the fact that regenerative leaders or leaders of any kind are actually ecosystem nurturers. How can I nurture the system? How can I start to, instead of seeing this as three separate systems, for example, three versions of ecosystems, where the normal approach to intervention is that if we are sick, we apply medicine. If we have pests in the fields, we apply pesticides. If we have, for example, crime in cities, we put people into prisons. We need to start to move beyond that, and we need to start to work with the system. And a great final example that I wanted to mention before we wrap up is the amazing acupuncturist Jaime Lerner. And Jaime Lerner was a Brazilian mayor who took over the town of Curitiba. at a point in time where Curitiba was one of the poorest towns of Brazil. And he won, and he became mayor, and there was a tradition in Curitiba to close the doors, and then the new mayor would work with the city officials to come out with a 5-year plan. They would launch that, they would celebrate, and that would be it. And he was like, I'm not doing that. What I want to do is I want to go around the streets, and I want to sense the music of my streets. I want to talk to the people in my city. I want to sense where is the potential, where is the tension, and where can I work with the system on creating new health and vitality. And so he did. So he walked the streets for 100 days, and he said, I'm not doing a 5-year plan. We have a rolling strategy here, because the world tomorrow is not the same world as the world today. So he did various interventions. He put up a park bench where people needed that to gather. He allowed Isabella to run farmers markets. He made sure the cities or the children in the favelas, the poor areas, got access to school and electricity. He did various things. And over the course of 8 years, he had helped transition Curitiba to one of the richest cities in Brazil. He worked as a very humble man, but he had that capacity to listen and to sense and respond. So finally, if any of this is intriguing to you, there is the DNA framework that you could start to get your head around. And in the book, there's an assessment. So you can take the Regenerative Business DNA assessment, and you can get an overview as to what extent are you regenerative right now? Where's your potential focus areas? But really, it's all about starting to tap into a new level of consciousness. It's all about realizing that the era of regeneration won't come through by another kind of 10-step model or process or new framework that we implement and integrate and off we go. It's about a new way of thinking. It's about us stepping into our true name as being Homo sapiens. It's about us being custodians and stewards of this planet. And there's so many fields that we can lend wisdom from. The field of agility is one, but it's only one piece of a larger puzzle. And for us to not be one of those that are contributing to a silo-focused approach, you need to start to get your head around the other components that are constantly influencing our ability to be truly agile. And the essence is to tap into this wisdom of life and to allow a new level of consciousness to emerge collectively by us training the capacity to hold space for a new way of being. That's all I had. Thank you so much. And I think we have time for a few questions, right?
Laura, thank you so much for this excellent opening keynote here today. Are there some questions in the audience or feedback to Laura? Please.
Hi, Laura. Is it working? Yes. Yeah. Thanks for the energetic talk. I enjoyed it very much. On one of your first slides, you said that 50% of the leaders admitted that they don't have that they feel that they're not equipped with the right methods or things that they need to like manage in a complex environment. I think in the past and up until now, we have, organizations have had the tendency to like have people of a certain personality characteristic in the leading executive positions, which tend to not have the courage to admit that. What is your perspective on the future? Do we evolve as a society to like have less of those personalities in a whole, or do we change our perspective on the value of those characteristics? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so of course none of us have a crystal ball, but I'm really greatly trained at looking for the cracks of light because I've needed that capacity because I've worked in the field of climate change and sustainability my entire life. So I've trained myself to look for the positive or else I would collapse, to be honest. What I see is this new recognition that we need the odd ones out. We actually need them at the C-level suite. And we need people that can think outside the box. And we need people that have true courage. We need people like the founder of Patagonia, who's just given away his entire company. And I think that decision is one of many decisions that are being made right now, and examples that are creating ripples effect and are inspiring others. But the challenge is that right now we have so many people that have walked the corporate ladder and have gained the title, gained the prestige, gained the money by acting a very certain, very specific way. And for them to say, uh-oh, this was not the right approach, I gotta walk down, and then I got to enter a new green space where I have no answers, where I need to start to hold space for the answers to emerge. That takes so much courage. And I'm afraid the current C-level suite don't have what it takes. That I haven't seen it. I've seen it in a few, but it's not the general rule. But I think the next generation, and I don't mean those that are kids now, I mean the millennials, once they for real start to take over the C-level suite, we will start to see things shift. And that is what I see again and again. So I think that is something that will happen within the next 5 years. There's a growing recognition that we need the alpha male who's the loudest, the most dominant. It's something else. Right? There's a hand back there.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much for this very inspiring talk. I really appreciated it. And I'm just thinking right now, may I dare to ask a really daring question? Do we need leaders at all? Because what you're pointing at is a system that's like basically relying on the idea that all the parts are using their sensors, right?
We need a new definition of leadership. And what we actually say also in the book is that regenerative leadership is not for leaders, it's for everyone, because we all need to tap into our inner leadership, and we are all leaders. So that kind of hierarchical way of viewing leadership, where the leader is the one who has all the answers, that is what we need to let go of. And the leader is more of a space holder. But that's a capacity that we need to see in many employees. So I would agree with you that to a large extent, we need a different kind of leader, and we need to let go with that belief that we need a leader.
Yeah, I mean, that's, to be honest, the consequence that I'm drawing from your talk, and I'm just surprised that there's no slide showing that. But thank you so much.
Thank you. I like to subscribe every single sentence you said. My question is, I'm missing a special slide in the last 10 minutes. You have shown a slide of the biggest companies.
I can't hear you, sorry. Can you speak a little louder?
Okay, I try.
Yeah, better.
I'm missing a special slide in the last minutes, because you have shown a slide about the biggest companies in the 70s and in the, I think, the thousands. And I'm missing a slide about the biggest companies of this time.
Yeah, but what I was saying was that from today, 52% of those that were on the list in the year 2000 are no longer here.
Okay, thank you.
Once again, thank you for the great talk. One question. Today's organizations have so many reinforcing loops to stabilize their current sick system.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've learned about systems is if you change the players, nothing will change with the behavior of
If
the
you
system.
change what, sorry?
The players in the system, the actors. So what makes you so confident that a new generation leadership will actually not be deprived by the system and be able to start new stuff?
I think it's because I'm allowed a front row seat at some of these organizations that are first and foremost growing in number, but are also really desperate to experiment with new organizational design frameworks. And they want a greater degree of self-organization, but self-organization is not the answer for all organization, and there are various degrees as to how does a living system applied logic to organizational design. What does that look like? It doesn't have to be fully self-organized. But I'm very optimistic because I see this eager to do things differently. And I meet cases from government institutions to startups to big multinationals that, okay, you know, we can't change the entire machine at once, but let's start with this division here. And let's start to test things and new ways of being so that they can create ripples, and we can, and that could be an acupuncture point. And that can be our pilot project. So many companies right now are retrofitting the plane mid-flight that I get to work with. So I know it's happening. Not at the speed that we need, to be honest, but I hope that we can lend a little hope in exponentials, that this is also changing at a rapid speed. But I'm confident that this is happening. But part of my message to you today is that just to avoid, as I said, tuning in on self-organization or agility as the answer, or at least understand the interconnectedness and the tapestry of life upon which you are operating. So it doesn't become framed as a plug-in you install and off you go and now you're agile. I'm not saying you do that, but it's just that we need to avoid letting the mechanistic, rigid mindset take over the agility space, which is something that I have seen quite often, to be honest.
Thank you so much. So have a look to the remote participants.
Sorry?
Just have a look to the remote participants if there's some question to you. So remote, what's with you? Please open your mic and tell us your question. All right, there's nothing. So then thank you very much, Laura.
Thank you, and have a wonderful conference. And thank you for having me.